Hey guys, welcome back to Cummings Gun Works. Today we're going to be having a little bit of a discussion about the 44 Magnum. Today I've got my Taurus Tracker 44 revolver. We'll have a quick discussion about wheel guns in general, their operation, why I like them, and we'll talk a little bit about the 44 Magnum and its history as a cartridge. It's got a long-standing tradition behind it, and I really look forward to sharing it with you. So let's get to it. Shooters ready? Stand by! Hey guys, welcome back to the cleaning table. Like I said, today we're going to be having a look at my Taurus Tracker 44 Magnum double action revolver. You can see that it is unloaded. I want to take a quick moment at the start here just to briefly go over double action revolvers and how they operate. So, what does it mean for something to be double action? Well, back in the day, before double action revolvers came out, you had single action revolvers. And the operation of those was such that every time you wanted to fire the gun, you first had to pull the hammer, which as you can see rotates the cylinder, locks it into position, and then you pull the trigger. That's single action, because the trigger performs one action. It is to release the hammer. On a double action revolver, pulling the trigger not only cocks the hammer, but also releases it. That's what makes it double action. To open it up, you push this button forward, just like on a Smith & Wesson, and the cylinder will swing out on the crane, like so. You have an ejector rod here on the front of the cylinder. This is used to remove spent casings. When you're done firing the gun, you push back on this, and the little star pops out. This will grip into the rims on the casings when they're loaded up. Push on this, you can extract your spent casings and load fresh cartridges into the cylinder. This one is 5 rounds of 44 Magnum. 44 Magnum is a pretty cool cartridge. It came out in the 50s as a brainchild of Elmer Keith, who was a big writer at the time, big outdoorsman, sportsman, hunting guide. There was one anecdote about him right after Smith & Wesson came out with the Model 29 in 56. Smith & Wesson worked with Keith in 1956 to come out with the Model 29, which obviously became very popular immediately following that, but especially after the movie Dirty Harry came out in 1971. The Smith & Wesson Model 29 is one of those iconic firearms. I digress. There's an anecdote about a hunting trip on which Keith used his Model 29 Smith & Wesson to take down a wounded deer from, I think it was 600 yards away. So, whether there's truth to it or not, I couldn't tell you, but it's one of those stories that really helped solidify the popularity of the cartridge. The 29s are built on the in-frame, and there's been a lot of copycats that come out since then. Immediately following the 29, Ruger came out with their Black Hawk and 44 Magnum, or maybe the Super Black Hawk. But a lot of manufacturers have taken up production of firearms since then in that cartridge. It's very popular, very powerful. On the upper end, they can crank out upwards of, I think, about 1,500 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, which is, rivaling some lighter rifle cartridges. Some of the more powerful stuff can only be chambered in Rugers. They are known for being, really overly built like tanks, and you can actually buy, excuse me, you can actually buy cartridges that say on the box only to be shot in Ruger revolvers because of that. So anyway, back to this gun in particular. The front, as you can see, is ported. The actual rifling of the barrel stops about right here, and then this front portion is just a hollow jacket. Might be able to show it to you if I get the light right. Not really. But this front portion here is just a hollow jacket with these ports on the top to compensate for recoil. The grips, these are the stock grips that come on the Taurus Tracker. They're fantastic, very comfortable to use. I've had some pretty hot loads through this thing and never had any problems out of, as far as discomfort is concerned. It's got a 2-point lockup system, so you can see right here you have this little notch. This is spring loaded, and it goes into the locking surface. Let me see if I can get the light right. There we go. The locking surface right here on the frame. So it's got that lockup point. It also locks up in the rear right here. There we go. The little nubbin right there is spring-loaded, and it slides along this track here in the back. Ooh, that's dirty. You can tell it's time for a cleaning. It slides along this track here in the back and comes to rest right here on this pin. That pin is what pushes back on the release switch. So when it pushes that back and you push it forward, it moves the pin out of the way, pushes it into the cylinder so that you have a nice flush surface there, and that allows it to swing out. The way that revolvers operate, the way that the cylinders, the chambers in the cylinder index is through the use of these little notches right here. These notches lock up with the bolt, which is this little part right here. The way it works is when you pull back on the hammer, the first thing, or the hammer or the trigger, the first thing that happens is the bolt drops out of the way. That frees up the rotation of the cylinder. And if you can see in the back of the frame there's a little protrusion that's going to start moving up. Just like that. A little protrusion in the back right there is called the hand. The hand interfaces with these ratchets on the back of the cylinder. These little star bits right here. And rotates it around. When it gets to the correct position, the bolt will drop back into place. The hand will continue pushing it until it clicks in, and then the gun is locked up and indexed properly so that the chamber is directly behind the forcing cone and the barrel. Make sure everything's lined up right. When you close a double action revolver, close it by the cylinder and make sure it's properly indexed, make sure it's locked in place. I'll try to get it wrong so that I can demonstrate that. There we go. Okay, so now I closed it, and I want to rotate it in place. Now it's locked up. The sights on the Taurus are pretty straightforward. You just got a simple red ramp on the front, and the rear sights, as you can see, are just plain black. They're not great, but they're not target sights. A lot of people like to give Taurus crap for quality control problems, but I've owned several Taurus revolvers. I can't say anything about their semi-automatics, but the revolvers have always been really good for me. Cleaning these is really simple, as you would expect for a revolver. You've got the barrel and you've got your chambers, and that's about it. So we'll get to it. I've got my cleaning rod. I've got a .44 caliber brush. Thread that on. We're just going to be using the trusty old Hops No. 9 bore solvent. Clean this out. Give it a little dip. Right. Big bore brush equals big bore mess. Expect to get your hands dirty. Elmer Keith was a really cool guy. His writing is pretty neat. He's on the same plane with like Jack O'Connor when it comes to that sort of stuff. So if you're into outdoor writing, I would definitely give him a look. Like I said, the .44 Magnum came out in 1956 after the Smith & Wesson worked with Elmer Keith on getting it produced. Prior to that, Keith had actually been working on hand-loading the .44 Special up to some pretty hot tolerances. And he contracted with Smith & Wesson to get the actual production Magnum put out. This was following the 1930s when Smith & Wesson had taken the .38 Special and stretched it out to the .357 Magnum, which became so popular, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. The point of stretching the case, by the way, for those of you who aren't aware, I mean, yes, it does add some volume for extra powder, but the main reason that they stretch the cases on Magnum pistol cartridges is because of the fact that they don't want people putting a Magnum powered cartridge into a gun that is only designed to handle the pressures of a lower powered cartridge. Obviously that can lead to some pretty catastrophic results. So the bore's cleaned out. I'm going to clean out the chambers in the cylinder. For that, I think I'm just going to hit it with some CLP. CLP is pretty commonplace stuff. I've mentioned that before. It's just like Ballistol. A lot of YouTube guys like to use Ballistol. This is just what I have access to. It's pretty much the same shtick. nice and messy. That's what happens when you have 5 chambers to clean out. Go back to my brush. Just give these a quick scrub. 3, 4, 5. Okay. Put a jag back on. Run through these with some patches. On the subject of longer cases, something to be aware of when you're shooting one of these revolvers that's chambered for a magnum cartridge is that when you are shooting these and you're shooting, both magnums and lighter cartridges, it's generally a better practice to shoot the magnums first, because the shorter cartridges, the less powerful cartridges, because they have a shorter case length, you can run into an issue where there is fouling in front of where the case rests inside the cylinder. So let's say that a 44 special case comes to here and a 44 magnum case comes to here. Well, if you're shooting 44 specials, from this point in the cylinder forward, there's going to be fouling inside the cylinder. And then when you load a longer case into it, there's going to be tighter tolerances around the case head, I'm sorry, not the case head, the end of the case, the mouth of the case, when you load those longer cartridges in, and you might end up having some issues with failure to extract. It's just going to be sticky. It's going to make things more difficult for you. So just bear that in mind when you're shooting one of these Magnum revolvers. I haven't actually fired any 44 specials through this one, but there are some lighter loaded, like Cowboy Action 44 Magnum cartridges that it likes to eat pretty well. I have put some Buffalo Bore, not the super hot stuff, but some of their hotter loads through it, and it's handled it just fine. Almost there. And 5. Okay, let's have a look at that. If we can get a good angle on the video. There we go. Nice and shiny. You can see, actually let me get the angle back. You see that ridge down there in the bottom of the cylinder? Let me get it just right. There we go. That ridge down in there. That ridge will be further back on like a 44 special to ensure that you can't load 44 magnums into it. If the cylinder isn't so short that they won't load into it anyway, which it shouldn't be, but it's a safety mechanism. I'm just going to get my rag in here and clean off the gunk on the frame. If you haven't seen the movie Dirty Harry, by the way, I would recommend checking it out. It's a little grungy, but Clint Eastwood did a good job in that role. 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world. Which, while it's actually true in 1971 that the 44 Magnum was the most powerful production handgun, the 454 Casull Wildcat had already started to grow in popularity at that time, so technically it wasn't the most powerful handgun in the world anymore. But it certainly was when it came out in '56. Clean the front of the cylinder. It's already got plenty of solvent on it. Just got to wipe it down. And that CLP is going to soak in around the front of the cylinder here, around the crane, and lubricate the cylinder so it can spin freely, as you can see. It is possible to break this thing all the way down and clean it out, but you really don't need to. This is called the forcing cone. This section here, where the projectile first meets the barrel and bites into the rifling. and it is designed to direct the projectile. It's got a bit of a cone shape to it, and a slightly wider mouth, and it is designed to make sure that the projectile enters the barrel cleanly and you don't have any stoppages, because obviously if you fire a projectile and it doesn't go anywhere, all that pressure's got to go somewhere. If you ever have any timing problems with your revolver, have it looked at by a gunsmith. Absolutely have it looked at. Timing problems on revolvers are very dangerous. If you're not familiar with timing and what it is basically, as I mentioned before, the first thing that happens when you pull the trigger or the hammer is the bolt drops out of the way. And then, the hand bites into the cylinder and rotates it over. And then the bolt drops back in, and the hand pushes it home. Everything clicks into place nice and tight, and it locks up. If it doesn't do that properly 100% of the time, then you've got a very dangerous pipe bomb in your hands waiting to go off. If you have any issues where it doesn't lock up all the time, pull the hammer back slowly. Check the cylinder. If you're buying a used gun, always do this. Pull the hammer back slowly on each chamber. Check the cylinder, make sure it's nice and tight, and then do it quickly. Check it again all the way around. Make sure they're all good. Because the last thing you want is a revolver that's out of time that could potentially fire when the projectile isn't lined up with the forcing cone. Let's get a little light down. I like stainless steel. I mean, I don't like how much it shows dirt, but I like how easy it cleans up. And that's pretty much all there is to that, guys. I appreciate you checking this video out. If you liked it, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, check out the blog in the description below. I keep a website with a blog running. I try to keep it updated, but it's been a while. I've been pretty busy recently. I got a lot of long-range content on there. If you're interested in that, give it a look. Appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Remember, not only your target, but what's beyond it. Thanks, y'all.